Welcome to the Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco podcast. I'm Laura DiFrancesco, your host. We're talking all about mergers and acquisitions, buying and selling small businesses, as well as corporate law. We are taking our experience closing over $10 billion of transactions since founding Dean Street Law 5 years ago, and my experience being an M&A and corporate attorney for over a decade and making it accessible to you as an entrepreneur. I hope that this helps you in navigating the complex world of mergers and acquisitions. And also, we're always happy to be a resource for you here at Dean Street Law. You can always apply to work with us through our complimentary consultations linked in our show notes. And a huge shout out and thank you to everyone who's subscribed and left us a 5-star review. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe and also leave us a 5-star review. It's one of the best ways to support us as a small business. And also be sure to share with your friends and colleagues on social media, through text, email, or however is easiest. It means the world to us that you're supporting our content and helps us make more to support you in your journey. Welcome back to another episode of the Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco podcast. I'm so excited for some new developments to share. We have my book, Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition, A Legal Guide to Buying a Small Business. The prototype of it here in the background, it's going to be on pre-sale soon. So be sure to join the waiting list. It's linked in the show notes. Would love to share that with you. If you'd like a preview, message me. Would be happy to share a preview with you. So I'm really excited to talk about today's episode, which are the 5 mistakes that I see buyers making when approaching an acquisition. So these are things that I see routinely. They're going to be both on the business side as well as the legal side. We're going to mix it up a little bit. There are a lot of mistakes that I see, but there's a couple of ones that are glaring and stick out the most that I want to share with you so that you can avoid those. We do have our course, Acquisition Insights, and that's over 80 lessons of the legal aspects of buying a business. If you'd like to learn more about how to really prepare yourself for this new venture, buying a small business. And then we also have the book, Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition, A Legal Guide to Buying a Small Business. So you can check that out as well. And we have Dean Street Law here to support you also. We specialize in representing buyers and sellers, buying and selling small businesses. So we've done hundreds of these types of transactions. What are the biggest mistakes that we see? And these are not mistakes necessarily that persist through closing or that have been our clients or whatnot. They're just things that I see from talking to people and from helping them through a lot of these issues. These are ultimately, if we're working together, mistakes that you will not be making, but that I want to share because I've heard a lot of stories in the industry. I've seen a lot of mistakes. I go in consultation calls and people think that they know one thing about buying a small business and they have no idea, respectfully. It's a big process. It's a big commitment. So the number one issue that I see is that they think that they can use templates to acquire a business. There's so many different things with this. I see this on the upper markets of where someone works in private equity and has all this experience and think they know so much about buying a small business because they have represented a company buying a small business. What they don't know is that even as someone who went through law school and became an attorney and specialized in mergers and acquisitions, my associates could not pick out the correct template every single time to work on, having 5 years experience specifically working on the legal documents. Now, I train my team members really well. They have a lot of experience, but there's still just so much that they don't know that a decade of experience in mergers and acquisitions has given me to be able to say, I know what's in this template and I know what's missing from this template. They might be able to pick out the right template to use, but they don't know what's necessarily missing from the template or what we need to address and customize for this specific transaction. So a lot of people say, oh, lawyers work from templates. Not really. We have a standard set of documents that we've vetted that apply in different circumstances, but I have very, very different base documents. I don't like to call them templates because they're really not. base documents that apply in the event of a membership interest purchase. So if you're doing a stock purchase, but it's for an LLC, it's actually called a membership interest purchase. So we have those. We have ones for deals of $1 million, deals of 5 or 10 million, deals of 25 and 50 million. So there's a lot of different scale that you have to these types of transactions and expectations of the parties. Things like knowledge qualifiers, or the amount of representations and warranties, or the amount of closing deliverables necessary for a different size transaction. So respectfully, if you think that you know a lot about transactions, but you have not been a mergers and acquisitions attorney for 7 or 8 years, there's so much you won't know. ChatGPT can't get you through this. Templates can't get you through this. If you try to put this private equity template that you've had a lawyer approve or something like that in front of a seller who has a $2 million business, and they're faced with 20 plus pages of representations and warranties, 3 plus pages of reps and warranties for HR, and 3 plus pages of reps and warranties for tax, you're going to lose the deal. And it's not worth losing a deal. And also, if you're on the business side, you don't know the legal aspects that are going to go into this, and they are complex. There's so many things. When we take a base document, we don't just make a couple edits. In a lot of instances, we have massive restructures and overhauls, because while something is a base, I review every single sentence, every single paragraph. We customize absolutely everything, every bit of information that you've told us, every bit of thing that we've looked at from due diligence influences how those documents are customized for deliverables, representations, and warranties. A simple thing, if you have received financial statements and then you have representations and warranties saying that they are prepared in accordance with GAAP and they are audited and all of these things, but let's face it, the company has not been having accounting practices in accordance with GAAP, they're going to see this and say, did you even look at our books? I mean, none of this makes sense based on the transaction and due diligence materials that you provided. So number one mistake I see, obviously this is not with our clients, but with so many people coming to consultation calls telling me, I'd like for you to work off of our templates. I worked in private equity, I worked in investment banking, and I have templates. They're not necessarily going to be great. And also people have said, oh, well, I found these templates on the internet. I'm sure if you're in entrepreneurship through acquisition, you know that there are sets of templates that people share on the internet. And I'm saying, ooh, I've actually reviewed those templates, and they're not good. They're not going to actually protect you the way that you think they are. They're not going to actually do what you think they're going to do in a transaction. We have battle-tested templates, and that's the reason we do share our LOI template. We do have our set of templates early on in the transaction that I feel comfortable sharing. Our pre-LOI due diligence request list, our due diligence request list, our closing checklist. Those things are not going to get you into deep water if you use our templates. We also have explanations and videos explaining how to use our letter of intent templates, all within Acquisition Insights. It took me years to feel comfortable putting together a template that I feel like I could educate people enough of, like, what you know, what you don't know. Here's how to customize it. We give a discounted rate to customize our template if someone buys it and then realizes they're in over their head or there's something different or something. So it took me a lot to put those templates out, because templates in the wrong hands with someone who doesn't understand what they don't know. And the only reason I do share those is because I also provide the educational resources, the videos, the training materials. I clearly state what you do and you do not know. If someone uses templates and they don't know what they don't know, you are going to get yourself in a whole lot of trouble. And I would hate for someone to spend millions of dollars on a business and it not be legally enforceable because they don't realize all the transaction documents that they need to legally close a transaction. It's not real estate. It's not private equity. It's quite a bit different. Entrepreneurship through acquisition has to be tailored to the size of the acquisition company that you're buying. It needs to be thoughtful, and you need to be well protected. Most people are investing their life's savings in this. It needs to be done well. When it comes to navigating corporate law, entrepreneurship, and managing small businesses, experience matters. Dean Street Law is a boutique corporate firm specializing in mergers and acquisitions and additional focus in real estate, commercial transactions, finance, and corporate governance. With over $10 billion in deals closed, Dean Street Law has extensive experience representing hundreds of clients in thousands of transactions, from small businesses to Fortune 500 companies. Whether you need startup guidance or advice on closing multi-million or multi-billion dollar deals, we're your trusted partner every step of the way. Visit deanstreetlaw.com in the show notes to schedule a complimentary consultation. And the next mistake that I see is not understanding the business operations. And so some people will try to skimp on due diligence and say, I just need you to prepare a purchase agreement. I can't prepare a purchase agreement without having done due diligence, because there's so much that goes through due diligence that you need to know as an attorney to properly represent the buyer in buying a business. For instance, do you actually legally know who the owners are? They may say who they are, and then you look at the documentation and the minutes and the stock ledger and all of that, and actually find out that there are other owners and that you need everyone's consent to sell the business. And even if it's one owner, you still legally need consent to sell the business, and your lender will not approve the financing without the proper legal documentation. So unless you're all paying all cash and want to potentially burn all your money, have good legal counsel that's going to support you and that's going to help you have actual good documentation, and documentation that's legally enforceable and that is customized to the business operations. Because there's so much when you're thinking about buying a business that you have to consider in your transaction documents: the non-compete, the transfer of bank accounts, the transfer of working capital, accounts receivable, accounts payable, how all of that is going to be detailed, and the specifics around how you're going to have access to the passwords and logins. That needs to be in your account, in your purchase agreement. So what we do when we're doing due diligence, we have in Acquisition Insights the pre-LOI due diligence request list. And actually, if you leave a 5-star review for my book on Amazon, we have a thank you page where you can send it to us, a copy of your review, and receive our pre-LOI due diligence request list. So that'll be in the show notes when it's available. And then we also have our post-LOI due diligence request list. We do customize this from deal to deal, but we have those templates available on our Acquisition Insights. So you really have to know the business operations and know the questions to ask during due diligence to properly understand the business. In real estate, you have an inspector. If you are planning on doing renovations, you might go in through the piece of real estate and property with your general contractor. In buying a business, there are so many more things that you have to diligence: operations, financials, legal, and sometimes more than that. So we do ourselves have those due diligence request lists that we send out, and then we review every single piece of due diligence materials that are provided, whether or not they're legal, because they do impact the legal transaction and the transfer of the business. And then we put together a report for our clients, do follow-up questions with the seller, and then update that report and everything like that. That report has every single document in it, which is usually 300 plus documents that we're diligencing in a transaction. So it's well worth it. We see things that happen on the operational side that you may not see, that we say, okay, well, we've got these key pieces of intellectual property. We actually need to make sure that they are owned by the business and not owned by the creator, because intellectual property is actually owned by the creator unless it's expressly transferred to the business. So those are some instances of where we are looking into these things and then understanding, but wait, if you just paid millions of dollars for this business and it didn't have the intellectual property, it would be worthless. But if you don't have the proper assignment of that intellectual property through the proper legal documentation, you basically just spent millions of dollars, and someone can say, actually, you don't own this. That would be terrible. We don't want that for you. Another risk I see is overpaying for the business. So I rarely see this going in closing, because first, lenders have to underwrite the transaction. And so they are reviewing it to make sure that you would be sufficiently capitalized to repay the loan. So it's rare to see this because you've got multiple layers of review. And then sometimes you have investors who are also reviewing it. And then most buyers, if they are unfamiliar with how to value a business, they're talking to valuation experts or financial consultants who are going to be able to help them assist them in valuing the business. With that said, it does happen. And when it happens horribly. And I did see this happen with a client. I was an associate at the time and just kind of following everyone's directions, and they wanted to close a $50 million deal in 2 weeks over Thanksgiving. And through no fault of the legal department, they did not actually diligence the financials well enough because they closed a $50 million deal in 2 weeks. And the business was bankrupt, and they didn't realize it because they didn't go through the numbers carefully enough to realize that they didn't have enough working capital and enough cash in the business and accounts receivables and anything to keep the business afloat. And it was immediately in workout. So it's a shame that that happened. And it's rare that it happens because it's rare that it would get to closing with so many eyes on a transaction. But you do have to be very careful to make sure that you have cash in the business post-closing, whether that's working capital, which we negotiate and discuss, or it's having a line of credit with lenders, making sure that you have the appropriate credit to satisfy the credit needs of the business post-closing. Incredibly important. And then also really understanding the economic impacts. So I've heard stories, haven't worked on deals specifically, where a business tanked post-closing because it had a lot of outside economic influences that the buyer was not aware of. And it was not as protected from those outside influences as they thought. So really understand, what are the economic drivers? What is going to be a bad market for this business? Because you have to be able to successfully operate this business post-closing, whether it's a good market, which we hope it is, or if the market turns and it's a bad market. And that can mean a lot of things: geopolitical risks, environmental risks. I have a farm. Let's be real. Farming is directly impacted by the weather. I don't use that as my sole source of income, but it is one thing to consider when I'm thinking of how much I have as my cushion to get through hard times. That's always important. The next is a lack of an integration plan, both from a business and a legal perspective. We work with our clients to work through this as we're going through due diligence. We're identifying everything that needs to be transitioned in the business. Even if it's a stock purchase and you're changing ownership, you still need to change control. You need to have directors and officers resign and appointments of directors and officers, or whatever the case may be, depending on the legal type of entity that it is. So you legally have to do this, but operationally, you also have to do this. In our elements that we list in the purchase agreement of the closing deliverables, we include keys, accounts, passwords. If it's a stock purchase or a membership interest purchase, you have to do authorizations with the bank for the transfer of control of the bank accounts. So there's a lot of logistics that you need to consider, and we configure all of that based on questions that we ask in due diligence and leading up to closing, so that we best understand the business operations and exactly what needs to happen to transition the business. If you don't have a transition plan, it will be chaos. And also, if you're not working through the whole process diligently and using the exclusivity period and the pre-closing period diligently, it's going to be a whole huge rush of cortisol up to closing, which we avoid by doing things in a very proactive manner. And then if you don't have an integration plan and a transition plan of the legal and operational things that need to happen, it'll be a cluster when you're going to transition your ownership, and you don't want that. You want your first days on the job to be productive, good time to get to know others. You don't need to be thinking of like, oh gosh, the seller still has access to all the bank accounts. How do I get access to that? And all flustered. That's not what you want. You want to own your power. You want to be the person that you want to be in this next phase of life. And that is all centered on having the right support around you. Thinking about buying a business? Unlock the secrets of successful acquisitions with Acquisition Insights, your legal roadmap for success. With over 81 modules of video lectures, written materials, guides, and checklists, we provide in-depth guidance to navigate every step of the process. From initial interest to closing the deal, get the expertise you need to make informed decisions. You can also access our battle-tested templates in the Acquisition Insights course and templates bundle, including our template LOIs, letters of intent, pre- and post-LOI due diligence request list, material deal terms lists, and more. Visit lauradifrancesco.co/the-shop today and take the first step towards buying your dream business. All the links are in the show notes. The next element is ignoring the human element, which I think is really important and a lot of people tend to ignore. And that's really important aspect of diligence that we talk about immediately. As soon as we're talking about the letter of intent, I say, who are the key employees that you couldn't operate the business with post-closing? And they are oftentimes people that we want to have an employment agreement with, whether it's 1 page or 2 pages or 5 pages, to make sure that there's incentivization and alignment and contracts to make sure that the operations of the business can continue post-closing, because people are your business. And there's a lot of different things that we do with sellers to make them feel comfortable about talking to the key employees pre-closing. Sometimes it's after the purchase agreement's been signed or something like that, to make sure that there's security and comfort there. But it is super important to retain that key talent and create a positive work environment post-closing. Sometimes people don't think of retention bonuses, and sometimes that's a drop in the bucket that could be really influential and helpful to make sure that your employees are compensated and feel like they're a part of the transition. And then the next element is misunderstanding or not understanding the time commitment, both from the buyer's perspective and the seller's perspective. Most of the time, the buyer understands this, and sometimes it's really the seller that doesn't understand this, because they're used to operating their business however much they do or don't work in their business. They may not be used to replying to due diligence requests and everything like that. So when we're working with sellers, we have a lot of preparation that we do with them to help them understand how to work through a due diligence request time period. As soon as we start working with them, we say, hey, due diligence is coming, start getting these types of documents ready and let us know if you have questions, so that by the time that they get the due diligence request list, they have all of these things easily at their fingertips. They're ready to upload them to the data room. It does take time. Sometimes it takes sellers weeks and months to get all of these documents. So you really want to have your seller prepared. So of course, if you're on the buy side and you have representation, you could always let them know that Dean Street Law is available for sell side representation. And also, in terms of buy side representation to help the seller, we also prepare the closing checklist at the beginning of the transaction. Most attorneys wait until after the purchase agreement is drafted. Yes, the purchase agreement will influence the closing checklist, but it's better to update the closing checklist than not to share it at all, because a lot of times buyers and sellers don't realize how many documents are necessary to legally transfer a business. Like I said, did you think about transitioning the control of the business through the resignation of officers and directors and the appointment of new management? If you didn't think about that, those are at least 2 documents that you didn't think about that you needed in your transaction. A lot of people say if they're coming to a consultation call and they're not really familiar with the process of buying a business, they say to me, I'd just like you to draft a purchase agreement. And I'm kind of like laughing in the inside, like, ooh, if you just wanted me to draft a purchase agreement, it would be honestly a waste of money, because you can't legally transfer a business by just having a purchase agreement. You need all of these other things to support you. So a lot of buyers and sellers don't realize the complexity that it is and the amount of documents. We're usually typically talking 10 to 15 documents to transfer a business legally. And if they're not aware of all of the work that it's going to take, the sellers, it can really be frustrating and stressful unnecessarily. If you properly communicate, make sure that they're aligned, make sure that they understand what's expected of them, what deliverables they need to provide, make sure early on that we're asking for that tax clearance certificate, which the IRS tends to take weeks and months to deliver. So, the first thing when we ask for due diligence, we also ask for the tax clearance certificate, because it is an important aspect of selling the business to make sure that there aren't any outstanding tax liabilities, but that does take weeks for the IRS or the tax authority to provide that. So I hope this has been helpful, sharing a few of the biggest mistakes that I see. I try to approach these in a really compassionate way. I know it's just a matter of lack of education, oftentimes, that people don't realize, but sometimes a lot of the people and folks that are entering this space have a lot of confidence, which I am always a fan of. They have a lot of confidence. They've done deals before. They might be working in private equity or investment banking or something like that, but they don't realize that there's so much more to it, and it's just not that simple. And you need to have the proper support, both from a legal perspective and a business perspective, to get the deal done correctly. We're always here to help at Dean Street Law. Happy to schedule a complimentary consultation. The link is in our show notes. And it would mean the absolute world to me if you could leave a 5-star review, leave a comment on our Spotify, share this with a friend, tag us on social media at DiFrancesco on X, at Laura DiFrancesco on LinkedIn and Search Funder. And of course, check out and pre-order our book. It'll be linked in the show notes as soon as it's available. It's coming to Amazon soon. So I'm really, really excited. And I thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco podcast. Cheers and happy deal making. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco podcast. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and that it brought you one step closer to mastering the art of mergers and acquisitions. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And if you found value in our discussion, please leave a 5-star review. It would mean the world to us. And share this podcast with your network, friends, and colleagues. For more in-depth resources, be sure to visit our website, deanstreetlaw.com, where you can find articles, guides, and more information on our services. Don't forget to follow us on social media for the latest episodes, updates, tips, and exclusive content. You can find us on LinkedIn, Search Funder, at DiFrancesco on X, and at Dean Street Law on Instagram. Join us on our next episode where we'll explore more deal-making insights. Cheers and happy deal making.